I'm Rena. My name is Rena. I am a co-founder at Game of Finance, and this is my second year hosting a summer camp. Last year, we focused on personal finance, and it was highly a success. I have my biggest interest in behavior economics. I actually want to study that, major that in college. So it is one of my strongest passions. And I'm really happy to bring the class to you guys and have opportunity to spread this knowledge to more young individuals.
Hi, I'm Amy, and obviously I'm really excited for this summer program to officially kick off. I mainly manage a lot of the website things, and I'm very passionate about this subject as well. I'm reaching out with some speakers about so to see if they can come in and help us out with some industry insights. And I'm mainly excited to learn about how this study can apply to everyday life. Yes.
All right. So my name is Talal. I'm from the United States, specifically the state of North Carolina, and I'm going to be one of your co-facilitators for this program. A little bit about me. One of my biggest passions is in community betterment and engagement, which has led me to some amazing opportunities like founding my own nonprofit organization and holding state leadership positions in others, one of which led me to Game of Finance in this position here. And I'm looking forward to sharing my expertise and knowledge of behavioral economics with you all over the next week or so.
Hey, my name is Abdul Khilwatgar. I am the co-founder of Afghan Student Guidance Program, which is a nonprofit dedicated to helping underrepresented Afghan students in receiving academic aid and college advising. I hope that we can learn something from each other in this very impactful course that Game of Finance hosts.
This is what we're on right now. You want to subscribe to the Game of Finance. Now, these are your three choices. If it was you, which deal would you select?
Yes, so it's just like 1, 2, 3, and then just type in the number. 1 will be podcast only, 2 will be Zoom class only, and 3 will be podcast plus Zoom meeting. Which one would you buy hypothetically?
So we can see that majority of the people choose 3, right? Okay, no, some people choose 1. One person chose 1. Alara chose 1. Okay, so now Amy, what?
2 people. I think, yeah.
Okay, so now that's this. What about now? Choice 1 or choice 2? If we were to go back to the previous screen, right? Right here, we have podcast only, Zoom class only, podcast plus Zoom. And then right here, we only took out the middle one. So we took this out and we see here, right? Nothing changed except we took the middle one out. But the result that you guys chose was very different. With the first, majority of you guys, with the exception of 1 to 2, chose this one. But when we took out the middle option, we can see half of the people move their original option to here. So this middle thing, what is so interesting about it, and why is it that no one chose that one? And if we were to think rationally, okay, if you chose this the first time, why did you change your decision when we took out the middle? So this is what we're going to learn about today. This is the human aspects when we're making decisions of buying something. And that's what makes this topic so interesting, because not only we're not going to look at economic models or data that are very rational. Rather, we're going to look at the human behaviors in making decisions. For example, if Game of Finance is trying to make a sale right now, would we make more money if we had these 3 options, or would we make more money if we had only these 2 options? Of course, as you guys can already tell, we probably would have made more money if this was presented rather than this. So that is a marketing skill when we take advantage of human behaviors. Now, this is how we want to introduce the topic of relativity to you guys. So as you can see, today's title is learning about relativity. And when you look at these price options, right? do you guys really know if how much each Zoom class or each podcast is really worth and how much effort it takes for us to produce it? The price that we put on here, do you really know if it's worth the product? As human beings, we don't have an internal value meter that tells us how much things are really worth. Rather, we focus on the relative advantage of one thing over another and estimate the value accordingly. For instance, we don't know really how much an electric bike is, but we know that it must be more expensive in a regular bike that is not electronic, for example. So in this case, this is all about relativity. You compare the prices and then you decide, you make your decision. Again, here, you compare the prices and then you make your decision. So that is the introduction of relativity, which is one topic in behavioral economics. Now, before we go on to review, okay, why are we making these decisions? What is behavioral economics? It is the combination of economics with psychology. When we implement the human behavioral aspects, psychology aspects into looking at economic analysis, whether it's microeconomics or macroeconomics. But in this unit, we're mainly focusing on microeconomics, which focuses on individual human beings and individual firms and businesses. So this experiment is actually presented by a professor right now currently at Duke. And instead of, of course, Game of Finance subscription, he did a subscription on The Economist. So as you can see, this is very similar concept than the one we present with Game of Finance. As you can see, Economist subscription, this is 1 year subscription to the online access, right? And then we have the print. And then the third option is print and website subscription. So this was very similar to the first one, right? So we have one thing, another thing, and then both combined. But the last two have the same value. So same here. This is $59, but then this is $125, and this is $125. And in the second case, we took out the middle option. So what this professor did is he asked around 1,000 MIT students to choose these subscriptions. And as you can see, the first time when he presented this ad, 16% of the students choose to buy this option, while 84% choose to buy this option. But if we were to take out the middle thing for them to compare the prices, 68% decide on the first one and only 33% decide on the second one. Now, this is very similar results with the one we tested on you guys before. Okay, so now why is this happening? This is actually not the most rational thing to do, right? If you chose this originally, why did you switch from this to here when we only take out the middle? It's because as human beings, most people don't really know what they want unless they see it in context. So they don't know what they really want unless they see a middle being compared. They don't know what they really want unless it's being compared to something else. And we might not even know what kind of car we want unless we compare it with other cars, with other people's cars. We don't know what kind of speaker system we want until we hear different sets of speakers to determine which sound the best. We might not even know what kind of lives that we want to live unless we see other people live our dream life or compare ourselves with our peers or our cousins, right? So everything is relative. We constantly compare not just ourselves, but with prices when we make purchases. So what does this reveal? This reveals that it's relativity and there's huge human aspects played in the role of making decisions. Amy, do you have anything to add on this slide?
Yes, I just want to say that here you can tell the middle choice, it doesn't do anything. No one actually chooses it. It just acts as a distraction to consumers, to fool people who do not know the marketing strategies behind it. So this is what businesses do. And you see, no one chose it. So they just have to display it because they know people are not going to choose it. It is a distraction.
Yeah, and this distraction is what we're going to introduce. The first term is called a decoy. So I will be writing that on the screen. So this middle thing is what we call the decoy, and we will be constantly referring to this term throughout the class, because what a decoy used for is to pursue you to make another decision. They are obviously trying to let you buy the third subscription, but by putting in this decoy, they have promoted this option. So what could possibly change their minds from 84% buying this, change their minds to the first option just by removing the decoy? It is the presence of the decoy, right? And the absence of the decoy changed their minds. So this is not very irrational. It is predictably irrational. And that's why we're teaching this entire theory based on this book called Predictably Irrational. And this is one of the leading behavioral economic book that is leading the field. So we're teaching off of that. And what does predictably irrational mean? It means that the irrational behaviors of human beings, they are perfectly predictable. And once we can master that, you can apply it into your lives, into business, into marketing strategies, and also know when business are trying to persuade you to buy something. So that is the goal of what we're trying to understand in our summer camp today, this week. Yeah. Amy, do you have anything to add with the introduction? Okay. What about Talal and Abdul?
No, you covered it perfectly.
All right. Okay, so predictably rational. So let's look at a closer, deeper look into relativity. Okay, so if we were to look at this image, so what is relativity? The ways in which people frequently regard their environment in terms of their relation to others. So as you can see, the middle circle can't seem to stay the same size. It appears to be bigger here and appears to be smaller here. So when placed among bigger circles, it gets smaller. But when placed among smaller circles, it gets bigger. The middle circle is actually the same exact size in both positions, of course, but it appears to change depending on the surroundings of what we're comparing it with, of what we place it next to. So we're always looking at the things around us in relation to others. We just can't help it. So this holds true not only for physical things like in restaurants or these circles or these subscriptions, but it also holds true for vacations and educational options. For example, we're always comparing jobs with jobs or vacation with vacations, lovers with lovers and wines with wines. So the concept of relativity, it is everywhere. And that is the first topic of our focus on behavior economics. So relativity is easy to understand, but there's one aspect of relativity that is consistently tripping us up. That is, we not only tend to compare things with one another, but also tend to focus on comparing things that are easily comparable and avoid things that are not easily comparable. So we're going to focus on some things that are not as easily comparable as we might imagine. So to demonstrate the concept of relativity even more, we wanted to take a look at two examples. So the first example is a restaurant example. So have you guys ever been to like a very high-end restaurant and then their food is at very, very high price? So another marketing strategy that people use when, for example, okay, let's just look at this. Which one would you purchase? I think, oh God, I didn't change up the price. But so with a restaurant example, one of the first theories that came up in doing menus, if they are trying to sell something, for example, we have two entries right now, right? We have a pasta and we have fried chicken, right? If we want to sell the pasta, we would place the fried chicken. Now let's not think about, okay, would you either prefer pasta or fried chicken? But instead, we want to lure the customers into buying one item on the menu. We would then place other products higher than this one that you want to sell. So no matter how high you place the price, you always want to place something higher so that people will buy the price a little bit lower. They will not purchase the highest, but they will think, okay, so I'm not buying the most expensive, but I can buy the second most expensive. So the second most expensive is what the restaurant is trying to sell. Okay, so now think on that a little bit. I'm gonna give you guys a second example that you guys might be able to relate a little bit more. Okay, that makes sense. So the bread maker example. So you guys know William Sonoma? So William Sonoma, he sells the store, they sells utilities in the kitchen, right? So when he first introduced a home bread bakery, so bread bakery is basically a machine used to make breads, right? The machine was sold for $275. So he placed it $275. That is when bread bakery machine is first introduced. So a lot of consumers, they were not interested. They were not interested in buying. And because what makes a home bread making machine anyway? People don't really know what that is. And did anyone really need a home baked bread when you can easily go buy it from somewhere else? Why not just buy a fancy coffee maker instead of a bread maker machine? So one of their marketing strategy is that they, instead of just displaying this bread maker on the window, they placed a larger size bread maker to compare to the regular size and placed it $412.5. And guess what happened? People immediately started buying the regular size. So why did these sales went up? Simply because consumers now had two models of bakers, bread makers to choose from. And since one is clearly larger and much more expensive than the other, people didn't have to make their decision in a vacuum. They could just say, well, I don't know much about bread makers, but I do know that if I were to buy one, I'd rather buy the smaller one with less money. So now they have something to compare with. They see, okay, now I know the price of regular because I can compare it to something large. So that is the same concept with the menu. If they want to sell an item on the menu, they just have to make something else more expensive so people are persuaded to buy that. Okay, so to prove again that we actually don't have the correct theory on what things are really worth and we really depend on relativity, we, Abdul have made a Kahoot game.
So it's Guess the Price by Game of Finance. So the national average price of an organic iceberg lettuce. Let's see if you guys know how much lettuce is. Okay, it's actually $2.50, which is rather expensive for lettuce, but it is organic. Which, if you're in America, it is widely consumed by everybody. Okay. I guess most of our are from America. Base markers. These are more expensive than I thought, and I don't know why I have two of the same answers. I apologize. Okay, only two other people chose the other one, so props to you guys as well. This is due to supply chain issues, it's pretty expensive, just giving that hint out there. Yeah. I don't know a watch would be that expensive for another book that we have a class on. Game of Finance has a class on. It's a brand new copy. It's not that expensive, just moderately priced. there's a CPU chip by AMD. These are, oh, I won't say anything. And yeah, okay. So
It's a lot of space.
with third place is Shireen. I'm sorry if I apologize if I pronounce that wrong. Maida, and then Lucy, first place by a long shot. Talal and Brittany are good job as well.
Okay, well, that was a very funny narration while the game was going on. Okay, so the purpose of the game, thank you so much, Abdul, first. The purpose is to realize that, okay, we actually don't have a value of what prices are unless it's being placed in the grocery market. So how do we determine, oh, when your parents say the price of eggs are going up, well, do you really know how much price of eggs really are, or are you just comparing with the price before, right? So that is another way of demonstrating that these prices are set due to how we relate to them. For example, if you live in New York and you rent a small apartment for, let's say, $3,000, now you can think that that is very, very expensive if you live in a rural area where you can rent a whole house for $3,000. So that is where the role of relativity kicks in. Yeah, so we don't have an internal value meter that tells us how much things really worth. Rather, we focus on the relative advantage of one thing over another and estimate the value accordingly. So as you guys remember, Abdul, during the game, he says, oh, you can see that the chip is going to be a little bit more expensive because the name is so complex. So that is another thing you guys can think about is how do we name the things that we want to sell, right? For example, in a Michelin restaurant, rather than saying, okay, simply putting coffee on the menu, they might put a cafe with a little accent in the end, and that might just make the whole thing more expensive. So that is a very good thing that we'll be covering in our future classes.
Yes, and how do we apply this to every day? You know, how we talked about buying different things, the prices, but how do we apply it to, you know, everyday interactions with human beings and applying relativity? So for instance, you want to appeal good to an event. So say if you're going to an event and you're looking for a potential partner, or you want to attract people, you want to look good. How are you going to position yourself using relativity to achieve your goal? And this is real in real life. It is actually a written experiment. So I'm going to explain this to you. So there is a theory of A minus A and B, which if you can go to the next slide, I can show this to you. So attribute 1, you can see it as the y-axis and attribute 2 as the x-axis. Right now, if you're just looking at the first picture, A and B, which one is better? You can't really tell because B has a lot on attribute, it's the other one. B has a lot on attribute B 2, but probably not 1. But A is the opposite, vice versa. So you can't really compare these two because you don't know which one is better. But then if you introduce a decoy, which is minus A, on the second graph, you automatically know that A is definitely better than minus A, right? The farther object is along its respective axis. Yes, thank you, Abdul, for this quote. Yes. So then when you have this minus A introduced, you know that A is definitely better than minus A. So what you would choose is probably A, because minus A tells you that it is less than A. And you have an obvious example because you can compare. And when I talk about the event, this is very deceptive and it is not very good, but you can use this. So the example is basically, if you want to appeal for an event, you just bring a friend that is similar to you, but a little bit less appealing than you. So when people look at you guys together, they can see, oh, comparing these two people, I know which one is obviously more appealing because there's someone to compare to. obviously don't tell your friend about your theory when you invite them, but this is basically a real life application that we exemplify and that we see happening because the author, Dan Ariely, of this book actually did a real life experiment of asking people questions regarding these. So say if two faces, one face, they're very similar, but the A- face labeled might have like a distorted eyebrow or something. So that will be explained in a later slide. But if you guys know what I mean, for everyday application, one example is if you want to appeal to someone or a group of people for the first time, bring someone who looks similar to you, like body shape, height, everything, but is less appealing somewhat. And you can use that as comparative advantage.
Yeah, obviously what the example Amy just presented to you guys is one way of how to apply it, but the purpose is to show you guys how this works. Okay.
So how can relativity harm us? We spent the last two slides kind of explaining what relativity is and the role it plays in each of our lives to kind of help you understand where it kind of situates in everything that you do in everyday life. But the most important thing is understanding how it can harm us, specifically on your mental plane and in our economic lives, which is what I'm going to focus on. Next slide, please. So by a quick show of hands, how many of you guys either use TikTok or know what TikTok is? Okay, I'm assuming it's the vast majority. So if you do use TikTok, oh, thank you. If you do use TikTok, you would know that there's a general self-improvement trend that's been going on recently, where people will post either pictures or videos of their physique, their business, in an attempt to kind of influence or motivate people to reach their own goals, which is good, but you also need to understand the role that relativity can play in this. We need to understand that there are two types of people that are consuming this content. The first person is going to look at that content and think, hey, maybe I should start my own business, go toward my own goals, get that six pack I've always wanted. And that's what we want because it's a good benefit of relativity because they compare themselves in a way that gives them motivation. But the other type of person is where the detriment can come in, where someone will compare themselves and instead of using it as motivation, they'll create obstacles for themselves. And they'll think maybe there's no way I can spend that much time, money, or effort to get that six pack or start that business. There's no way I can do that. So that's where relativity can be a huge detriment to our mental health and our mental capacity, which is the first point. So who you surround yourself with is who you compare yourself to. And a lot of us don't realize that social media is one of the biggest ways we can surround ourselves with people without actually understanding that we're surrounding ourselves. Because we consume so much content from so many different types of people that you can be influenced in a lot of ways without even realizing it. And the quote from Dan Ariely underneath that kind of wraps everything perfectly. Jealousy and envy spring from comparing our lot in life with that of others. So comparing yourself excessively with other people and not using it as motivation can just bring negative emotions like jealousy and envy, will just bring you down and influence a lot of different areas of your life and not just your mental state. So that leads me to the next point, which is harmful economic crises. So I want you guys to think back to the year 1993 with me. And in that year, the average CEO was making 131 times as much as the average salary worker. Now you might be thinking that's a crazy divide between the rich and the poor. And I agree, and so did a lot of other people, which is why in 1993, regulations were passed that required businesses to start publicizing salaries of all the workers in the company. And what they were trying to do is that they were trying to use relativity to solve a problem of kind of closing that divide, but they didn't understand what relativity would really do, and it ended up working against them. So they hoped that people would start comparing CEO salaries to average worker salaries and think something's wrong, we need to close that divide, and it would fix the problem. But instead, relativity played a part in different CEOs, and people started to compete among CEOs thinking, why am I not making as much money as this CEO? And they started competing and making more and more money. And instead of closing that divide, it made it much, much bigger. So now today, the average CEO makes about 369 times as much as the average salary worker. It's almost 3 times as much as the divide that we started out with. And it goes to show how much relativity can harm our economic lives, our mental capacity, and so many other different areas of our lives.
Okay, so since Talal explained how relativity can harm us, the question has to be asked, how do we avoid the impacts? As Talal said, who you surround yourself with is who you compare yourself to. All this comparing your life will only bring you like unnecessary stress and negative emotions, which don't help you in any way. So how do you avoid impacts, as I said before? So next slide. Okay. So there's two main ways of avoiding the impacts. One way is to control your circles of comparison. There's this quote, "A millionaire who has a Porsche will want what a billionaire who has a Ferrari has." This millionaire who, relative to some other people, has everything, wants even more. They are stuck in a cycle of desire that will just consume everything that they have, their time, money, and spirit, until they're just old, broke, and regretful or spiteful. Regretful in the way that they didn't invest in their own happiness. Maybe, for example, they didn't invest time with their family because they were out chasing material, and now they're estranged from the family, which is not a good situation to be in for a senior. So how do you break out of this cycle of desire that this millionaire is in? Well, one way is to let it consume you, as in the analogy of the old man. Another way is to take immediate action in controlling your life. One example of that immediate action is to limit whom you compare yourself to. It is natural to envy, but it's not okay to envy. When you compare yourself to more successful people, you have to realize that you're not being fair to yourself. Success is, in short, it's only a measure of one's hard work. I'll give you that, but it is even more a measure of luck, of the luck one has. Successful people have 100% of the time, I'll guarantee it, has lucked out. That's why it's not rational to compare yourself to other people, because none of you have been in the same situation or will ever be in the same situation. Therefore, you've never received the same opportunities to progress. And another way that you can break out of that cycle of desire that the millionaire was in is to become a person of small circles. In other words, have a small circle of devoted friends around you who share the same ideals, principles, and philosophies. And so whenever you will never feel the need to compare yourself to them, because you're so close to them and you're so alike. Next slide. And more, I know I talked a lot, but more on how to avoid the impacts of relativity. So following your passions and your interests, there's one example of what happens when you don't follow your passions and interests is the story about a Harvard graduate. He had this youthful goal of receiving a Nobel Peace Prize for cancer research. But one day he had a party with a couple of his higher stature friends, and he saw their penthouses and nice cars and yachts, and he thought, I want this. I want to be rich. I want the material that they have. And so he forsaked his goal. He left the research group. He became a medical investment advisor, which paid more than what he was before, a researcher. And so he was happy. He received an immediate gratification of money for a couple years, until he realized one day he heard that his research group actually won a Nobel Peace Prize. And he was just devastated, because he had given up something so complex and intricate, such as his childhood dream, for something so common and shallow as money. And next slide. So how does all of this tie together? How does relativity pertain to our personal lives? So as we know and see, relativity is everywhere. Jealousy exists in everything, and it only puts you in a path of self-destruction instead of self-improvement, which is not good for you. So we know now that to just get rid of this jealousy is to control your circles of comparison, limit to whom you compare yourself to. And that just eliminates the jealousy, as I said before, and it also eliminates that negative emotion that comes with the jealousy. And as we learned from the Harvard graduate, just focusing on your passions and not being distracted by shallower, less meaningful objects, such as money or fame, we will eventually achieve our goals and also receive that confidence boost that comes with it. We think, I stayed on my path and I completed something meaningful and worthwhile, and it is something I'll be remembered for. It gives us a sense of pride. Now, I want you guys to sincerely take this advice, and I can attest to this personally because I have, ever since I just completely cut off all the toxic people who I compared myself to, I realized the peace and mental stability that I was missing out on. It's so amazing. You guys should take this advice.
Yes, thank you, Abdul. Yes, so if you want happiness, the probably one of the only solution or the first solution is to use relativity to your advantage. The smaller circle you put yourself in, the smaller amount of people, objects, and things you're going to compare yourself to. And maybe you want to earn money, but what is the purpose of money? Is to make you happier, right? So if you want to be happy, we can look at the origination of that happiness instead of the causation of that happiness.
Yeah, and again, reflecting on what Talal and Abdul told us about some advice. Okay, so how can it harm us and how can we take advantage of it? I remember the quote, I'm sure you guys have heard about like, okay, so if you surround yourself with 5 idiots, you'll be the 6th idiot. If you surround yourself with 5 millionaires, you'll become the 6th millionaire. Is whoever you compare yourself with, if you do it in a good way and say, okay, I aim to be them, I'm going to work hard towards the life that they are working for, then that's good. But as Abdul said, if we compare them negatively, we self-harm, we talk down ourselves just because we see other people we compare with other people, that can really significantly harm you. So now we've covered the business side and the personal side. How does this really relate to behavioral economics? Because everything to do with microeconomics, it is about individuals and businesses and how these decisions are made to influence the economic movements. Now, what influences us to make these decisions? One of the factors is relativity. We make a purchase because we see the price being compared with others. We make a job decision. For example, that Harvard person, right? Instead of working at the lab to win his Nobel Prize, he decided to go into investments just because he sees comparison with his other peers. So what is the problem? He is making decisions even in career choices, comparing with others. So I want you guys to start maybe paying attention in your everyday life. What are some decisions that you make? And what are the premises that you make based off of? Is it because you're comparing with yourself, comparing with others, comparing with everything surrounding you? And I really appreciate when Abdul shared his personal experience. I'm sure you guys all have personal stories, but with myself, when I compare myself with other people, so much negative emotions comes in. But when you start comparing with your old self, okay, so how have I improved since last year or since middle school? It becomes much, much more interesting.